You never forget the night when the woods start screaming. It was just after midnight when the first 911 calls came in. Not from one house, but 4 neighbors, all living at the edge of Grady Pines, a quiet town where nothing much ever happened. They spoke over each other in panic, their voices raw, describing the same thing. An unnatural, drawn-out wail echoing from deep in the trees behind their homes. Not an animal, not a coyote. Something that sounded almost human but twisted. The operator tried to keep them calm, but each call ended the same way, with a sudden silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars sped down Willow Lane, headlights slicing through the thick fog that always rolled in from the woods this time of year. Officers Hernandez and Miller were the first on scene. Both seasoned, both calm under pressure, but even they admitted later that something about that night felt wrong before they'd even stepped out of the car. The air was heavy. The trees were too still. Their radios crackled with static, and when they stepped onto the damp grass, it felt like crossing into another world. They started with the Callahan house, the closest to where the screams were heard. Mr. Callahan was outside already, clutching a flashlight and shaking so hard the beam bounced across the yard. He kept saying he'd seen something moving just beyond the tree line. Not a man, not a deer, I swear I saw eyes. His wife wouldn't come outside. She was inside with their 2 children, every door locked. Hernandez and Miller scanned the edge of the woods, their own flashlights cutting through the blackness. That's when Miller spotted it. A single muddy, barefoot footprint pressed deep into the soft earth. It was huge, far too large for a child, but the toes looked off, almost twisted. As they moved closer, they found another and another, each one leading deeper into the trees, as if someone or something had just emerged from the woods and stood watching the houses. With backup en route, the officers made the call to follow the prints. Their breaths fogged the air, and every step into the woods felt like a dare. The silence was overwhelming. No insects, no wind, just the crunch of wet leaves under their boots. Then another scream shattered the quiet, much closer this time. Hernandez gripped his flashlight tighter, whispering, "That's no fox. That's no person either." The footprints grew erratic, sometimes doubling back, sometimes disappearing entirely. After nearly half a mile, the trail led them to a small clearing where the grass was flattened, as if something heavy had been dragged through. There, snagged on a low branch, was a torn scrap of bloody fabric. It looked fresh, too fresh. Miller radioed for immediate backup, his voice barely steady. Then just beyond the clearing, their flashlights caught something else. Claw marks. Deep, frantic gouges in the bark of an old oak tree, fresh enough that the sap still glistened. Whatever had made those marks was strong. Human? Animal? Something in between? And then, silence again. Even the radio went dead. Hernandez and Miller exchanged a look neither would forget for the rest of their lives. A look that said, "We should not be here." What would you do if the woods behind your home started screaming? Would you look for answers? Or lock your doors and pray it stops? Tell us in the comments, and if you want to know what the officers found next, subscribe now. Because in Grady Pines, the night is just beginning. The silence in the woods was absolute, so absolute it almost seemed unnatural. Hernandez and Miller, flashlights trembling just a little in their hands, stared at the blood-stained scrap of fabric and the raw claw marks on the oak. Every instinct told them to wait for backup, but protocol and adrenaline pushed them deeper. As they pressed forward, the radio finally sputtered back to life, distorted and crackling. A voice came through, barely audible. "Backup's 2 minutes out, hold your position." But neither officer could stand still. The prints, now more erratic and desperate, twisted through the brambles, some so fresh the earth still glistened. The woods were dense here, branches reached down like claws, and the fog seemed to coil around their ankles. Every few steps, they'd lose the trail, only to find it again in the mud, leading them further from safety. Miller shone his light up and caught something hanging from a low limb. A faded, waterlogged photograph pinned with a rusty nail. He stepped closer, squinting. It showed 3 children in front of a house neither officer recognized, faces blurred and edges burned. Hernandez felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The photo looked decades old, but it was still damp, as if someone had left it here recently. A faint rustle to their right made both men freeze. From behind a tangle of brush, they heard something moving. Slow, heavy, dragging. Hernandez whispered, "Police! Come out with your hands up!" There was no response. The noise stopped. They crept forward, boots silent in the wet moss, and found the source, a small makeshift altar. Stones arranged in a circle scattered with animal bones, old coins, and another scrap of bloody fabric. At the center sat a child's toy, a battered wooden train, its paint long gone. Miller looked around, feeling eyes watching from every shadow. "Who does this?" he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, from deeper in the woods, another scream ripped through the silence. This one even more desperate, a sound that made both men's blood run cold. It was closer, and now it was clearly human. They bolted in that direction, crashing through undergrowth, thorns tearing at their uniforms. They reached a narrow path, half hidden beneath fallen branches. Along the edge, symbols had been carved into the bark, strange, jagged shapes, each one different but all fresh. The footprints reappeared, smaller now, as if a child was fleeing into the darkness. Hernandez grabbed his radio again, voice shaking. "We need all available units now. Possible abduction, repeat, possible abduction in progress." Just as backup's distant sirens began to echo through the night, Miller stopped. Ahead, just at the edge of their flashlight beams, was a figure. Small, barefoot, filthy, a child standing utterly still, staring at the 2 officers with wide, glassy eyes. Blood ran down her arm and her mouth was twisted in terror. But before they could reach her, she bolted, darting into the woods with inhuman speed. The officers gave chase, stumbling over roots and stones, but she disappeared like a ghost among the trees. Breathless, they stopped in a small clearing. The fog pressed in thicker here, dampening all sound. Hernandez was the first to notice. The footprints continued, but now they were joined by a second set, much larger, moving alongside. Just then, a distant, desperate whisper echoed through the trees, a voice neither officer recognized, repeating the same word again and again. Miller turned pale. But when they replayed the body cam later, that voice was gone. The officers staggered in the foggy clearing, trying to steady their breathing as the second set of footprints grew clearer in the muddy earth. Hernandez swept his flashlight back and forth, heart thudding with each step. The footprints, one small, barefoot, the other much larger and bare as well, circled the clearing, doubled back, then vanished beneath a fallen log covered in moss. Before they could move, the backup units finally burst into the woods behind them, their shouts echoing through the trees. Blue and red lights flickered between the trunks, creating warped, shifting shadows. Sergeant Hollis barked orders, pulling Hernandez and Miller aside. Both tried to explain what they'd seen. The barefoot child, the bloody fabric, the whispering voice that now seemed like a fever dream. But the evidence was real. The backup officers found the bloody scrap, the carved symbols, and the makeshift altar. They even spotted the footprints, though in the confusion some prints were trampled and others already washed away by the misty air. As sunrise broke through the trees, the full search began. Dozens of officers and volunteers fanned out, methodically combing every inch of the woods. Dogs sniffed the ground, but always lost the scent near the altar or where the footprints disappeared. Locals watched from their windows, locking their doors and clutching children close. Rumors spread like wildfire. Was it a kidnapping? A cult? Had the missing girl from years ago finally returned? Or was it something darker? At noon, Miller, exhausted but determined, found another clue. A narrow, muddy path running parallel to a forgotten creek. This path was lined with more of the strange carvings, as if marking a route through the forest. The air grew colder even as the sun rose. Crows gathered overhead, cawing harshly as the officers pressed deeper. They stumbled upon an abandoned shack half swallowed by brambles and vines. Inside, the smell of damp rot and old earth was suffocating. The room was empty except for a single object, an old hand-cranked tape recorder, its tape still spinning. Miller reached out and pressed play. At first, only static, then faint garbled sounds, a child sobbing, a woman's desperate whisper, and finally that same inhuman wail from the night before. Every officer in the shack felt a chill ripple down their spine. The tape ended abruptly with heavy shuddering breaths and the clatter of something falling, then silence. Sergeant Hollis ordered the shack sealed as a crime scene, but already the volunteers outside were murmuring about the curse of Grady Pines. No one could remember who built the shack or how long it had stood there. That night, just as families tried to sleep, someone, or something, pressed muddy, twisted footprints against the Callahan's back window, leaving a bloody handprint no one could explain. And in the morning, the footprints led deeper into the forest, straight toward an abandoned cabin everyone in town pretended not to see. As dawn painted the sky a sickly gray, officers cordoned off the Callahan home, warning the family to stay inside. The bloody handprint on the glass was already drying, the mud below littered with strange, spiraling footprints. The whole town was buzzing. Nobody wanted to believe the rumors, but nobody could deny what they saw. Sergeant Hollis, eyes sunken from lack of sleep, gathered the search team at the edge of the woods. The plan was simple. Follow the new trail, whatever it took. With every step, the woods seemed to draw them deeper, swallowing the town's familiar sounds and filling the air with damp earth and rot. The path twisted and doubled back, symbols on the trees getting sharper, angrier. Somewhere ahead, the abandoned cabin waited. Everyone knew it, but nobody dared speak of it aloud. It had been empty for decades, its windows dark and its roof caved in, but today, a faint, wavering light glimmered through the cracked glass. The officers moved in cautiously, weapons drawn. The door hung half open, and as Hollis pushed it with his boot, it squealed on its hinges. Inside, the floor was covered in dirt and moss, as if the forest itself had crept in to claim the place. At the far wall, beneath a broken window, lay a pile of children's shoes, some ancient, cracked with age, others newer, but all muddied and arranged in a careful ring. At the center, a single candle flickered, impossibly fresh. Its wax ran in rivers down the side, pooling over a pile of faded photographs. Children, families, some familiar, others unknown, all their eyes scratched out. Next to the candle, a small, stained dress was laid out flat, as if prepared for a ritual. Hernandez, moving slowly, noticed fresh scratch marks along the cabin wall. They weren't random, they formed a crude pattern, spirals and crosses, some so deep they bled sap from the old wood. The scent of burning wax mixed with a strange, bitter aroma. Herbs or flowers left to rot. Suddenly, a quiet sound from the attic, a sob, muffled, almost lost in the wind. Miller signaled, and the officers moved as one, mounting the creaking stairs. The attic was little more than a crawl space, crowded with dust and the sharp tang of decay. In the corner, huddled beneath a torn blanket, was a young girl. Barefoot, face smudged with dirt, eyes wild with terror and exhaustion. She flinched as they approached, muttering something over and over, a word none of them understood, but that chilled their blood. Hollis tried to calm her, voice gentle, but she pressed herself deeper into the shadows, clutching a small wooden toy painted with streaks of dried blood. As Hernandez inched closer, the girl suddenly bolted, knocking over an old box. Its contents scattered, letters, bones, and a tattered family photograph of the Callahans. Only the children's faces left unmarked. The officers raced after her, but she slipped through a loose board and into the woods, disappearing before their eyes. In the wake of her escape, the candle guttered out, plunging the cabin into darkness. In the silence that followed, Hernandez picked up the strange photograph, feeling the weight of a dozen unanswered questions. Why did the girl look so much like the Callahans' missing daughter from years ago? What were the shoes for? And who, if anyone, had taught her the ritual marks? Inside the old cabin, Hernandez found a pile of children's shoes, each one older than the last. And at the center, a single flickering candle, burning even though no one had been inside for years. Days passed, but the woods offered no answers. Police combed every path, every abandoned shack and hollow, but the barefoot girl was gone, as if the forest had swallowed her whole. The Callahans, faced with the photo and the pile of old shoes, could only weep, unsure whether to grieve or hope. The bloody handprint faded from their window, but the memory did not. Sergeant Hollis filed the final report with heavy hands. He listed every fact and every piece of evidence: photos, claw marks, the tape recorder with its impossible screams, the patterns burned into the trees. But the story still didn't add up. No one could say for sure what had happened that night, or how the missing children fit into it. The town's gossip grew into legend, twisting the details each time the tale was retold. Neighbors started locking their doors long before sunset. Children no longer dared play near the woods. Some families moved away, unable to shake the feeling that something was still watching from the shadows. Every so often, someone would report seeing strange footprints in the mud, or hearing distant cries at midnight. But the police found nothing. The case was officially closed, but the unease lingered in every whispered conversation and every unexplained creak of the night. Years passed. The woods grew thicker, the old cabin collapsed, and most people tried to forget. But not everyone succeeded. On the anniversary of that night, 3 teenagers from a neighboring town disappeared while hiking through Grady Pines. Their parents found only a muddy trail of footprints, and pinned to a tree another faded photograph. 3 smiling children with their faces scratched out. To this day, some say the woods of Grady Pines hold the lost, the desperate, and the forgotten. Others claim the screaming never really stopped. It only waits for someone else to listen. And every year, when the mist rolls in and the world grows quiet, new footprints appear. Some small, some impossibly large, leading deeper into the darkness where answers are always just out of reach. What do you believe happened in those woods? Is it something that can be explained, or are there places where the truth simply won't come out? Let us know your theories in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories that blur the line between creepy and true, subscribe to True Crime Uncovered 4K. Because in Grady Pines, the story never really ends.